We ran and still do in the Victorian office a number of design review workshops looking at major projects around the city. And these prove extremely useful in terms of bringing together the peer group that is concerned with these issues and giving everyone the opportunity to have a voice on the topic. I won't dwell on these, but these are a couple of the projects that are now coming out of the ground in Perth. This is a major new indoor entertainment sports centre that's seating about 14,000. Okay, so that's as much as I'm going to say. It's a quick snapshot of the issue of how you might bring the issue of good design to a government setting and the range of strategies that you might consider in doing so. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Well, I'll ask the interview or questioning panel to come back up to the stage. Graham Scott, Amanda Hyde-de-Kretser and Gary Lawson.
Thank you. I'm sitting here feeling rather ill because we just don't have that kind of leadership at the high level from what I've seen and can tell. I'm just sort of wondering, the decision to set up a role like yours, how much hammering did the Institute do on the doors of the government, or did it come, how did this happen? Where did the bright idea come from, I guess?
It's always a mix. I mean, there is only so much the Institute can do. The Institute will often be misrepresented as being a self-interested body, and sometimes its views can be discounted as a result. With so many things like this, it has to do with individuals and someone knowing someone and starting a kind of steamroller effect. In the instance of the West Australian situation, there was a minister who was receptive to the idea from a number of people that he knew, and he recognised that some of the buildings that were being produced by government were of a lower quality than they should have been. And he, for whatever reason, was convinced that this might be a useful way to go. The first of the kind of new breed of government architects emerged in Australia in Queensland, and that was a one-day-a-week position. So it was a hell of an ask for that person to make a real difference. But they did do some very good things in their tenure. The West Australian one was created as a two-day-a-week position, which quickly blew out to 3. No staff, which quickly blew out to 4 or 5. So once you establish the need for it, you do find that support grows. It helps considerably if that support is from the very top. So the Premier or the Prime Minister is the person to go to.
And I think that leads to the next problem, doesn't it? Because we won't bore you with the sort of local political and legislative environment, but let's say it's just not conducive to that sort of thinking, particularly. I'd like to ask you why you thought Melbourne developed such a strong design culture. I mean, one of the easy answers is that the city is flat and that architecture is all there is, but there must be more to it than that. Someone must have sort of engendered the whole idea of civic pride in some way that hasn't actually happened in Auckland yet.
There's a whole variety of reasons in Melbourne, and it goes back to its very beginnings. The grid that was used to lay out the city has proved to be an incredibly robust, pliable grid that has served the city incredibly well. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with now the laneway system that operates in Melbourne, but the laneways are heavily inhabited by bars, coffee shops, restaurants, little dives that sell good music and clothing. They form the kind of lifeblood of the place. So it's the capacity to inhabit those spaces that original structure enabled the city. Then there was the gold rush that gave the city a level of confidence that really allowed it to pursue major civic buildings. And it's fascinating to go around the suburbs of Melbourne and look at the scale of the town halls that they built. They're massive structures. So it demonstrates from those very early days highly conceited level of civic ambition. And I think that's always been in place. More recently, through the 20th century, Melbourne has had some very, very good architects, and they've been highly articulate, they've written well, they've been willing to appear in the newspapers. And most recently, I think the work of Leon van Schaik at RMIT has been instrumental, because he invited a number of kind of mid-career practitioners into a master's degree program, which asked them to theorise their work, to reflect on their own body of work and to understand where it's come from, and to project where they might go from here. And again, that's helped serve to create a highly articulate profession.
Yep.
I guess my question is I think one of your first slides was to do with advocacy, that a lot of what you're talking about comes through in a sort of persuasive role rather than a rule-driven role. We certainly have a huge number of rules, but it's sort of interesting, I guess particularly in the role that I play as a part of a government organisation, is just feeling the sense of that occasionally that we have an obligation to develop in a certain way. We have a number of town centres, I guess, around Auckland, which has no residential core that's serving those town centres, so they simply cannot sustain themselves. And yet then we have government agencies, certainly not only Housing New Zealand, but DHB and all sorts of other agencies which have land that is undeveloped. Yet there is no obligation for it to be developed to serve urban design purposes. So we can persuade, and it gets persuaded through urban design, but in the end, the value to the particular organisation has a boundary over it. And I guess two of the things that you talked about, I guess, is values, spreading values out. I think I made a particular note that it's easier for government organisations to assess value across a whole number of different fields when developers can't do that. And that's one of the things that we have this problem of, that still the value seems to be contained within particular agencies rather than across agencies.